Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I'm extremely excited, mainly because it's been a handful of days since I've even done a recording myself. And as you can tell from the background on my end, I'm doing a little bit of traveling, but I'll be back at home base in the coming hours. Without further ado, though, I'm very excited because we're going to be delving into a couple different things today with a couple of my favorite people. We have Mason and Scott with us. How you guys doing? And of course, Scott, the floor is yours.
I'm doing good. How you doing, Mason?
Doing good, man. Glad to be here as always.
It's ought to be fun. So we're going to touch on a few different things. So Schumann resonance is pretty interesting. There's a lot of different correlations that relates to. It relates to the frequency that the heart beats at. It touches on how that can be detected like 3 feet from outside the body. So in 3 feet to the front, 3 feet to each side. So there's a 6-foot circumference of the human body that's detectable through science. The Schumann resonance also has effects on the human brain and the waves that produces. And we're going to get into some other things too. But without getting too far ahead, let me start screen sharing here. Share the audio. All right. So first of all, what is a Schumann resonance? In 1893, George Francis Fitzgerald noted that the upper layers of the atmosphere must be fairly good conductors. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just go straight to the notes. They're pretty good. So the Schumann resonance is weaker magnetic fields than the magnetic poles produce. And there is a cavity essentially of air, right? You have the conductive earth and the ionosphere, which is very high up. And the Schumann resonance is low magnetic frequencies that are able to travel around the earth inside of that cavity between the earth and the ionosphere. There's a primary resonant frequency, which is 7.8 hertz or cycles per second. But there are also 7 additional frequencies around that. We have 14 hertz, 20 hertz, 26 hertz, 33 hertz, which is an important one again, I'm sure, 39 hertz, and 45 hertz. Now, being that they're 8 in number, it to me, it speaks to not just brainwaves, but also the chakra system, right? So you have 7 and an octave, personally. Now, let's go over here. We'll go to the magnetic flux.
Sorry, Scott, before you move on, could I jump in real quick on the
Please do.
Wikipedia right back there? Thank you. Okay, so we see here, all right. Hence the second paragraph from, oh my gosh, the timing of this is quite peculiar. So let me start from the top here. In 1893, George Francis Fitzgerald noted that the upper layers of the atmosphere must be fairly good conductors. Assuming that the height of those layers is about 100 kilometers above the ground, he estimated that oscillations, in this case, the lowest mode of the Schumann resonances, would have a period of 0.1 seconds. Because of this contribution, it has been suggested to rename these resonances Schumann-Fitzgerald resonances. However, Fitzgerald's findings were not widely known, as they were only presented at a meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, followed by a brief mention in a column in Nature. Hence, first suggestion that an ionosphere existed capable of trapping electromagnetic waves is attributed to Heaviside and Kennelly in 1902. What's interesting is that it seems that this sort of postulation in 1902 took place only a handful of months after the very big mathematics and physics conference in London took place. And we see here, again, Oliver Heaviside in correspondence with Kennelly, Heinrich Hertz, James C. Maxwell. We see the same names popping up. Now, what's interesting is that it took another 20 years, as I'm reading here, before Edward Appleton and Barnett in 1925 were able to prove experimentally the existence of the ionosphere. Now, what's interesting is that we'll find here is that, to me, this speaks to the concept, again, of particle fluctuations of that, that's again particle fluctuations and the 0 point vacuum that in a 3D or even 4D sense is all around us in a resonant harmonic tone. And I say this because we'll see here that if we go to basic theory, we'll see, and I quote, right above the equation there, in an ideal cavity, perfect, thank you. In an ideal cavity, the resonant frequency of the nth mode, Fn, is determined by the Earth radius, A, and the speed of light, C. Now, let's keep this in mind, folks. We see here in an ideal cavity, the resonant frequency of the nth mode. I'd like to point out that it is to my understanding that when the letter or variable n is inserted in the sake of, for the sake of n-dimensional vector states, nth mode of this, nth modal, hyper spectroscopal quantum detectors and radars, N simply represents, honestly, in layman's terms, pardon my English, we have no fucking idea. That's essentially what that represents. And I'm saying this because it just speaks to, again, this whole angle of, sure, you go to Wikipedia, you see all these fancy equations and you're like, shit, I can never understand this. It may not be as complicated as one might think. And I appreciate, by the way, Scott, you bringing this up, because we see here, these signals are very weak at large distances from the lightning source. That's interesting because that speaks to, again, the way in which Tom Matt and others claim to be able to visualize thick time, which speaks to oscillators, harmonics. The closer you are to the source of that disseminator of the vibration, the faster it's going to be vibrating, because from your perspective, relative to the observation of that entropic state, you are approaching it more so. And the more you move away from it, the broader the waves are going to be frequentially. Sort of like swimming, sort of like in an ocean, if that makes sense. The closer you get to the rock that you dropped into that ocean or that pond, the faster you're going to feel the effects of it. So it's all relative based on where you are. And I find it interesting that it has to, again, 100 kilometers, 100 kilohertz, interesting relative to the Kármán line, almost as if there's something that is going back to your point, Scott, of the number 8, almost as if there's something in the atmosphere, for better or worse, is not for me to say, but something or someone wanted us to stop, I guess you could say, not hypothesizing, but experimenting and interacting with a certain part of the upper end of the ionosphere, almost as if there's, I don't know, shit going on there that something or someone doesn't want us to know about. That's where I lead to. But thank you for letting me jump in.
Of course. No, I'm happy to, man. So there are events that will affect the entire globe periodically, like massive high altitude, like up in the mesosphere, discharges of electricity, and that'll have large effects across the whole thing, kind of like a tornado over the ocean has an effect on big scales. You know what I mean? While studying this, I came across a video where the guy was talking about how if we go over to magnetic flux lines here, right? So we have a north and a south pole, right? Let's say this is the North Pole and this is the South Pole for ease of discussion here. And then out from there, you have the hardest end. No, sorry. Yes. Okay. So we're going out here and it's coming back in. And as you get closer towards the sides of this diamagnetic system, the field gets weaker. So all the way in here, you could say this right here is Earth. And now he's described these magnetic flux lines as a guitar string, interestingly enough. And he says, as you pluck it, it vibrates and it gives you a note in frequency, right? Now, the magnetic flux lines of the Earth are many orders of magnitude stronger than the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance is really small in comparison, which also correlates to the international standard of music, which is 440 hertz, right? But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Quick question, brother. Could these flux, let me see here, flux lines, if you will, are they or could they be, to your knowledge, scalar or entropic or negentropic in nature by chance?
So my understanding of scalar is a horizontal or longitudinal wave in relation to the direction the energy is traveling. So if you and I were holding a jump rope, right? I'm holding an end, you're holding an end. If I were to take it and shake it left to right, it would be a scalar wave moving that way. And then if I were to shake it up and down to you, that would be a transverse wave. Right?
Got you.
And if we did both, we'd have a vortex.
Got you. So combining longitudinal waves with transverse waves to create, again, vortex, stargate, portal, whatever you want to call it.
I suspect. I personally draw comparisons of like the Iron Cross or the Knights Templar cross to that. You know, you have four dipoles or two different axes in which the wave's traveling along. So it's
got you. And forgive me for jumping in, but would you be able to click on that picture on the top left there, dependency of captured? Yes. So we see this picture here, and what I find interesting, thank you. So it's okay. It's no worries. What I find so interesting about this picture is this speaks to me about, again, layers of that onion metaphorically. We can visualize that as an onion, but also the potential different states of entropy that speak to, again, when we see a craft, for example, going through a wall, it is vibrating at a lower or higher density. I'm afraid to use the words lower or higher, but you know what I mean, in order to ride that wave differently. And I say this because if you could, one last time, brother, if you could jump back to the Wikipedia page, if that's all right.
I'm done.
Thank you. We see here that, let me see where it was. It had to do with, it brought up here we go. Right below the equation, the real Earth ionosphere waveguide is not a perfect electromagnetic resonant cavity. Losses due to finite ionosphere electrical conductivity lower the propagation speed of electromagnetic signals in the cavity. Now the question then becomes, okay, what is a cavity, or what could a cavity be in this particular regard? Well, what's interesting is that right above the equation, we'll see here, in an ideal cavity, the resonant frequency of the whatever, we have no idea what it is, mode is determined by Earth radius, by the speed of light and all of that. Now, a cavity is essentially, you know, a containment of a particular set of whatever environmental states it derived from that and then contained it. And what's interesting is that photons, according to Dr. Hal Puthoff's 1994 presentation, photons, when you put them in a cavity, regardless of what stress, pressure, environment the cavity's in, generally speaking, the photons do not de-excite, which speaks to, again, if we could go back to your picture there, of the magnetic, there we go. Perfect. It's interesting that, again, these circles seem to represent not just layers of the onions, not just entropic states of again, like you said, transversal and longitudinal, whatever you could say, phenomenon, events, you name it, but they also seem to represent different states of that cavity relative to the power source that is emitting that cavity, or emitting that energy that could create the layers of the cavity to be harnessed and, dare I say, ridden, kind of like surfing a wave, if that makes sense. So it's interesting you bring this up because, not to jump the gun on your presentation, we see here that, I mean, it's been brought up in the past, Fluxliner has been the name of some of these ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles. And it's interesting that maybe the Fluxliner is riding the flux of some of the lines of these scalar, transversal, and longitudinal waves, excuse me. But thank you. I promise I won't.
No, dude, I don't mind at all, honestly. So to your point, if I recall seeing some of the alleged plans of the TR3B stuff, it had 3 gravity generators, right? And so if gravity is comparable with magnetism in that regard, then they both have lines of flux. So,
right.
But what I'm curious about, which I'm not fully aware one way or the other, is if the lines of flux are in motion, or if they're static, or if they are both. You know what I mean? In a superposition kind of thing.
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time just for the audience? That's a really good question, in my opinion.
So I don't know. Maybe someone in the science community could answer this question for me. With a magnetic field such as this with lines of flux, if the lines of flux are in motion, if they are static, or if they are both in kind of a quantum superposition kind of way.
Okay, oh my, that I want to thank you for that, because what's interesting about that is that speaks to the discussion that we had a while ago about, I think I had it maybe with Brandon, about randomness versus indeterminism relative to Nicholas Gissen's proposals, which is that, again, that speaks to the same set of three variable potentials that you just listed there, brother, which speaks to the G potential that Maxwell brought up in his equations. And wow, I can't, I'm seriously, for the audience, I'm realizing this in real time. So you said you are wondering if the scalar or the flux liners, or the forgive me, the magnetic fluxes are in motion, static, or they could be both in a sort of non-local quantum entanglement sense. That's
very
interesting.
Schrodinger, right?
Schrodinger, right, because it speaks to this whole concept of, again, Einstein's theory of general relativity, or even special relativity, which is that it's not that it is wrong, but rather incomplete, which speaks to James Maxwell's G potential being removed, which was the third potential, which speaks to the concept of duality, right? You have, bad, good, up, down, left, right, you name it, black, white, whatever you want to call it. But then you have that center point. And that speaks to me as well as Nicholas Gissen's thick time. The whole thing of, is it going to rain tomorrow? Yes, no, or neither, or both, because it has yet to be determined, if that makes sense. And to me, that speaks directly to your question. Are the lines of flux in motion, static, or both? I think this third option of both, in a state of it has yet to be determined, is separate from that of the concept of randomness and AI predictability. But I think that's what brings in the intuition angle from it. And to me, this also speaks to what we may be confined in geometrically, because there seems to be a limit, whether doing shapes, whether doing mathematics, whether asking questions like you just did. There seems to be a limit. It's either yes, no, or third option. And any other options are not possible, because they can be proven, but it's more difficult to think of them whilst getting to that point of provability, if that makes sense. Sort of like the Fibonacci thing. But Mason, please, brother.
All right, I'm gonna try to jump in here.
This is
so
great.
A little while ago, we were
great.
asking if the Schumann resonance was scalar. And so then I think, Scott, you a minute ago were saying something about scalar and tensor waves, and then the two combined together creating a vortex. And so looking at this and everything that we were just talking about, I'm wondering if the Schumann resonance is scalar, and if our own bioresonance is more of a tensor. I don't know if that's true or not, or I'm just like postulating, but what if the two together, because I know something that we were maybe going to touch on today is the connection between the Schumann resonance and our own bioresonance, and whether or not the two interact. And I'm almost wondering if the two of those actually create that vortex, which is something to do with time and space, if you get where I'm trying to pull ideas together.
So transverse, not tensor. I've only
transverse. Yes, thank you. I was looking up tensor waves the other day, so that's why it came out. But yes, thank you. Transverse.
Very interesting topic in its own right. The tensor stuff.
Yeah.
So because electromagnetics or solar, right? Solar storms, magnetic storms, lightning, electromagnetic discharge, those things affect it. And because, so I'm assuming that the ball Earth is correct in this. So
sure,
if it is a ball, right, or spherical in nature, then when you have these electrostatic discharges, it's going to be moving. All right, first we have the two planes. We have the Earth's surface and we have the ionosphere, right? So we have the cavitation in between of our atmosphere. In order for it to be moving around the Earth and for it to be trapped, it has to be going up and down. It has to be going transverse. Now, at the same time, if the charge is large enough for it to affect the entire atmosphere, it's also going to be longitudinal. It's going to be moving around the entire thing at the same time, right?
Right.
So it would make sense that it is both transverse and scalar in nature.
If I could just jump in real quick, I wonder, to your point, Scott, I wonder if certain parts of the, I guess you could say, of the planet on the surface have, I don't want to use this too loosely, but artificial cavities placed around the ionospheres, if that makes sense. Speaking to this whole thing of a geomagnetic grid fencing that may come into play as well. And I wanted to also add to what Mason said about transversibility. I wonder if collective consciousness directs the transversibility with respects to the focused intent, because if we are the source of our own subconscious operating table that we are being operated on, that perspective of us being the source relative to the pine cones kissing, the Knights Templar symbols, the Nazi symbolism, all of this, the reoccurrence of finding the focal point, ancient Egypt, time fears the pyramids, the vortex, the same idea. I wonder if that collection of united focus in a transversible sense, in a tensor sense, that's a whole other ballgame, but in a transversible sense, directs in the same way that we see oscillations kind of viewing, the way that quantum reality seems to be perceived. As reality is only as real as the individual observing it. If that observation in that cone-like way, via the photonic interpretation of our eyes, branches out more cavities that via our intent that we don't even realize collectively, that then create more, for better or worse, entropic states of disarray, chaos, confusion. And social media, for example, would only be an amplification of that collective disarray. But I think also we can use it. I don't mean to fearmonger. I say disarray because unfortunately I think that's what's going on right now. But I think if we brought ourselves together just enough to focus, just like anything else, you can take that isness and lean it instead of negative for positive. So thank you for letting me jump in.
Well, we're here to have a dialogue, man. It's not just me giving a lecture, because frankly, I don't have the scholastic credentials to be talking on this stuff in a this is how it is kind of manner. You know what I mean? So,
I appreciate it. I feel bad if you jumping into your
please don't. It's a loosely organized collection of ideas at best, my friend. So I want to show some pictures that I found here. I guess we'll open with the notepad. Not that one. Nope, that's not going to cut it. Dang. Okay, you know what? I'll just have to go back to the source where I sent it. We'll go here. Here we are. So these are the Schumann resonance frequencies. We have the primary frequency right here at 7.8 hertz, right? And I presume this is the amplitude on the left. Then 14, 20, 26, 33, 39, and 45. And you notice how these spikes are slowing down as it gets higher, right? To me, I immediately started thinking about the regular electromagnetic spectrum with, ultraviolet and infrared. Also, that apparently correlates with the brain waves and how our mind works, right? So I took some notes on that. I'm also going to zip over to it, but just for the sake of zipping through the numbers real quick, the gamma brain waves are at 30 to 100 hertz. Beta has 3 subsets. That's they go from beta 1, which is, we'll start at beta 3 and move down. Beta 3, which is 23 to 40 hertz. Beta 2, which is 15 to 23, or beta 1, which is 12.5 to 15 hertz. And as you can see that here, we have 14 hertz, and that's SMR, or also called the mu wave or flow state that people get into, apparently. Moving on to 20 here, that falls into beta 2. 26 hertz over here falls into beta 3. 33 hertz over here falls into, let's see here, that's still beta. 39 hertz, we're in gamma, and 45, I suppose, is still in gamma. But what's interesting, though, is that as if we go back over to this guy right here, and we take a look at this, we have it going in and it gets smaller and smaller, right? And so this is just a demonstration or an image, but if you were to take a piece of magnet and iron filings on paper, you'd see it gets really, really small. And so we also have theta waves, delta and subdelta waves, right? And so who's to say that those aren't more like earth frequencies, like in the ground, like ELF, VLF, Gwen, that kind of stuff? You're muted.
Right. Thank you. This is interesting. Okay, this has led me on a whole new train of thought now, wondering if speaking back to photons, cavities, vector scalar states, transversability, all of that, and tensor metrics, I wonder if they're, again, I want to apologize more so to the audience, because my intent is not to fearmonger or make it seem like we are in a trap of sorts, but it seems like even following the science, that's what it keeps leading back to, for me at least, pertaining to maybe not a trap per se, but a limitation beyond a certain level of observational understanding, whether mathematically, scientifically. And I say this because I wonder, to your point, Scott, and to what Mason was saying earlier, if there has been some deliberate establishment within both the physics, the field of physics, the field of electrodynamics, quantum electrodynamics, electromagnetic fields, and extremely low frequencies that prevent us from measuring on the surface, although I think the military can see this, prevent us from measuring on the surface the quantum state in which one can zoom into, for lack of a better term. I say that because when you said that horizontal line, Scott, keeps getting thinner and thinner and thinner, well, okay, in pure theory, theoretically, is there such thing as too thin? I don't think so, because if we are everywhere and nowhere, it's all relative to the observational state of what we're currently viewing. So if we were to say zoom in the same way someone does on psychedelics or something of the sort, you keep zooming into that line, that center line, if you will, that horizontal line. It's sort of like you keep following it, sort of like a dog chasing its tail. You keep seeing, you think you get to a point and then it goes in again, and then it just keeps zooming in again because of that concept of non-locality. And I wonder if the Schumann resonance is sort of like the key to the door of opening that. But again, that door of opening then leads us into the extremely low frequencies, and of course, which you so timely seem to be bringing up here. So please.
Yeah, man. Getting into it. So this is where I pulled it from. Neurosonica. Yeah, neurosonica.com. The beta is apparently where we do a lot of the alert and aware thinking, getting down. But here we go: slow, low, mid-range. Let's see here. Particular reason for an optimal frequency for focus or concentration, which I wonder if people who have ADHD or ADD have not a lot of activity perhaps in this range. And I don't know if it's an environmental product or a chemical product. Beta 3, it's in the higher range, arousal tape, anxiety, stress, paranoia, excessive energy, and humor.
Very interesting. So we see here sensor motor rhythms, excuse me. SMR rhythms are associated with the mu wave and flow states that are relaxed yet alert, focused and attentive. Some researchers refer to them as an idling rhythm. They occur most notably, when the body is inactive after physical exercise, and in clinical trials have proven helpful in assisting with sleep-related problems, including restless leg syndrome. Interesting, end quote.
So that's the 14.5, right? Just below the top of the SMR frequency here is the second frequency in the Schumann resonance there.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty interesting, that it's not quite double, because that would be 15, but that might be, like a point of eclipse kind of thing, where you're not actually in it, you're just rounding up.
Right, right.
Alpha, delta. There we are. So yeah, that flow state stuff, where people start getting, man, I could have swore I turned all that off. Sorry, guys.
No worries at all.
Yeah. Daggone. Yeah, it's off. I don't know.
Yeah, it's no worries.
Weird. Sorry, folks. You're just going to have to deal with it. I love you all the same. Theta wave. So theta is an interesting frequency of the brain. So that's also where kids stay when between up to the age of 7, because you can't just straight up talk to somebody and teach them all of the social P's and Q's and nuances in society, children stay in theta wave, which is the same state as hypnosis, right? So they're absorbing things all the time up until the age of 7. After 7, the brain starts changing chemically. Now, this is where, go ahead.
So yeah, if I could jump in, Scott, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately on the building of, sort of, the development from the ages of, birth and the physical all the way up until the age 7. What's interesting to me is that if we think about things like, for example, in a sort of harmonic way, if you will, similar to the images of the flux cavities there that you gave, I can't help but think of, for example, harmonic oscillations in a natural sense that are emitting from the body from birth to the age of 7, almost as if, again, each year, not necessarily, well, maybe having to do with the orbit relative to where one's located, is building each chakra in a harmonic sense. It is establishing the 7 chakras in a way that speaks to like those cavities surrounding you, except this time around, it's actually birthing within you. And that is why, for example, the concept of, dare I say, and this will be put on YouTube, but certain adrenal products, let's say, seem to be so prevalent and favored in the younger generations because of that ability of that purification of growth within the harmonic oscillation that build the chakras up until the age of 7. So I just wanted to throw that in there, but thank you.
That's a reasonable connection. I mean, so there's a lot to 7. 7's a big deal. So every 7 years, all of your body is constantly shedding cells, right? So every 7 years, you essentially have a new body. It shed all the cells: bone cells, blood cells, skin cells, liver cells, everything, brain cells. And damn. So little kids, right, being 7 and younger, I suppose, to your point, as you're saying there, or alluding to, one might say, young taste buds don't handle spicy food so well. They don't do all kinds of things. So because everything's so fresh and new, I mean, there's a reason people like veal, right? Young cow, very young cow, baby, essentially, spring chicken, as they say. So there is something to the youth aspect of that.
Which is interesting because it seems to be correlated with some of these alleged, stories of non-humans or non-terrestrial bipedal beings, looking human and having very pure, like baby-like skin, even when they're adults. They claim that we reek when they come to this planet, things like this. So yeah.
That's interesting. It's not the first time I kind of heard that. I heard that recently. Some other dude was talking about it. He was talking about inner earthers, saying that we stink up here, apparently. So
that's, talk about synchronicities. We'll talk later, but yeah.
Nice, man. The delta is interesting stuff. So as like I was saying, so what if the rate of the vibration, right, the hertz or cycles per second, correlates maybe directly or close to the distance from the Earth? So, as we're further out, maybe closer to the ionosphere, we're closer towards the 45 cycles per second, up closer, and as we get down closer towards the Earth where we are, because we're so small in comparison to some of the things I've seen allegedly in history, at 7.8 cycles per second. I don't really know. I really don't. So sympathetic vibrations. Have you guys heard that term before?
Sympathetic vibrations.
Right.
Potentially, so, but I doubt it.
When I'm sure you've seen the example of where someone has 2 tuning forks, right, of the same pitch. And they have one sitting isolated in a stand, and they strike the other one, and as they move it closer, that resonance starts to activate the other one, which is in the same frequency, right? So the vibration is traveling through a medium, the cavitation that we're in, and affecting the other tuning fork. So when I started getting into this study here, the guy referred to it as field wave resonance. Okay. And so to that to me, I was like, all right, well, what's that about? And then he started explaining it, and I was like, oh, sympathetic vibration. Okay. So like when you are in a room that happens to have a lot of old glass, old single pane glass in a room, and you make sounds, and the glass will vibrate at the same rate as the vibration that you're making with your mouth or musical instrument, what have you. Also called,
or when you walk in a room after an argument just happened and you feel the energetic vibration and you can tell.
That's a whole other thing too. So the heart also syncs up with this vibration, apparently. But all right, so sympathetic vibrations. Where is it going? Field wave resonance. I lost my train of thought, but it's okay.
No worries.
So moving forward a little bit, before we got on the started recording, Mason, you were talking about red sprites and elves and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm learning about the Schumann resonance is that as these electrical discharges happen, you can see them in space, but you can only see them on the night side of the planet. So you'll see like the red sprites, and then you'll have pegs or ticks on the other side or elsewhere. So the guy, there's a gentleman I was watching. I'll provide you the links to put in the video title later, Dave. But he was making references of a guy was on a phone in Rhode Island at a ELF facility, and he got on the horn with somebody in Colorado, and he'd be like, "Oh, I got a red spike," and he would get a spike on the Schumann resonance ELF monitoring station in Rhode Island. So these electrical discharges are capable of showing up over time.
Okay. Well, sorry, could I jump in with that? I've been for the past like 3-4 minutes as you've been breaking this down, which I thank you immensely for. I've been sort of doing my own little sketch and concept on there may be a concept or a potential of cavities within cavities, and more denser cavities layered on top of mirror cavities, depending where we are on the planet. And not meaning to detract from what you're doing, what you're showing here, but could I share my screen real quickly, if that's all right? Go ahead. Thank you. So I've been sketching, as you've been going through this, sort of the concept of, for those that recall, the Rooms Are Separate Games episode from 3-4 months back on the Patreon. And we see here, so imagine this is our home. The W represents the washroom, the L for, say, the living room, the G is the garage, say over here, we have, for example, the kitchen. Now, what's interesting is that it seems like adding on top of what Scott's been saying about, again, the flux, the magnetic fluxes and the cavities of them. What I find quite peculiar is, say, for example, we are the source of that, of the frequencies that are emitting. Now, you might be saying, okay, why are you using a cross to represent us as the source? Well, I would say that's because we are the pine cones kissing. We are the vortexes. We are the organic Stargate, if you want to call it that. Now, what's interesting to me is that, let's take this purple, for example. We seem to be, depending on the brainwave state in which we are in, regardless if we're awake, regardless if we're sleeping, you name it, we seem to be emitting vector scalar states of transversibility. Now, here's what's interesting. If we jump over here very quickly, a scalar versus vector state is that a scalar has length, area, volume, speed, mass, density, pressure, temperature, energy, entropy, work, and power, meaning that essentially it is the magnitude of it is everywhere and all over the place, right? As we see here, a scalar quantity has only magnitude. Now, if we go to vectors, they have both magnitude and direction. So we see vector quantities have displacement, because in order for something to be placed in one state, it must be displaced in another, which speaks to that duality of things. Direction, velocity, acceleration, momentum, force, lift, drag, thrust, and weight, which is interesting because that speaks relative to the 5 observables of, on the public angle of things, the UAP topic. Now, this is, again, I think a beautiful description here of something that is scalar and something that is vector, right? And if you combine vector scalar, what you then have are harmonic right angles that are being emitted from the 0 point source. Now, what is the 0 point source? It is that transverse line right down the middle, which speaks to Roger Penrose's collapsing the wave, which speaks to there are not 2 strands of our DNA, but 3. Actually, I would say more than that, but we'll leave it at 3, which speaks to, again, the variability of the potential archetype of what we're living in. Speaking to, again, going before, is it going to rain? Yes. Is it going to rain? No. But there may be a third option, which was also conveniently removed from Maxwell's potential equations, right? So point being is that if we take this image here of the vector scalar, variability of dissemination energetically, we can go and head back to the sketches here. Say again, the red crosses are us, and say you walk into the living room, right? And you're not really in a good mood. Whichever direction is going to be emitting, and it could be, by the way, you could be emitting this from all around you, but what I'm trying to get at is this here. So say you're in a shitty mood, pardon my English, you are now emitting, again, those resonant frequencies, and the farther away someone is from you, the less they're going to feel, and the closer they get, the more they're going to feel that energy resonating off of you. Now, here's what's equally as interesting. Let's instead of saying, oh, see this purple, it's going everywhere and all over the place in a magnitude sense, because, magnitude is all, all in every direction simultaneously. What if we apply the vector scalar state here, particularly the vector angle of things, where it is going in a particular direction? What's interesting is that we can find, for example, let's use green for this. So now this is the same person. On one side of their body, they're emitting, again, maybe a very negative energy, but on the other side, and I'll explain in a second, you might be saying, Dave, I thought we can only emit one feeling at once. Well, again, going back to honing that compass, if you will, that speaks to duality, right? On the other side, you're emitting a very positive sort of warm energy-like feeling. Now, again, when we look at this big picture, this speaks to us being in the center. We are the source of that dissemination, regardless of if it's good or bad, which speaks to, again, the concept of the balance and all of this. But let's go even one step further. What happens if there is something that is attempting to create, and I'm going to use, in this particular case, I will use yellow here. What if there is something that is actually, that is attempting to, now let's think about this from a non-local perspective. Let's say whether AI, whether something that is more powerful than us, or more, maybe not powerful, but is higher up on the metaphorical food chain than us, let's say, says, I don't like particularly the even keel of this dissemination of balanced energies, right? Purple, bad, green, good. So I want to confine them and their resonances into an entropic cavity. And so what you then have is, now that resonance is confined within that cavity. And here's the thing, because we are not aware of the fact that we are non-local, and there's something that is stopping us from, again, I don't like to use this word because it implies direction, but ascending, if you will, what you then have is someone or something could zoom you down into a mirror state of your home. And so what ends up happening is this yellow circle, in which you think encompasses the vast majority of the living room, is actually encompassing a much smaller state. So you go from thinking you're in the whole room to still thinking you're in the whole room, but to the rest of the observational consensus, quote unquote, reality states, you're really just this. You've become this now. But you don't know the difference because you have not seen a focal point or pillar to compare that zooming in and zooming out to. So then what you then have is, why would something do this, for better or worse, to us? Well, you now have the ability for more cavities to be created on the outside, and you layer those cavities on top of layers, and we ourselves don't even realize that we have been shrunk down, scaled up. Doesn't really matter the direction per se, so long as that we don't realize that there's an exponential point of growth outside of the 3 variables, whether that's in math, physics, you name it. So hopefully this makes sense, but this would be the idea. I mean, the zooming in, zooming out, and then messing with people in their own homes, if that makes sense. So using this type of concept, and actually we see here, epdf.pub has a fantastic set of publications on photons and atoms, and, you know, having to do with quantum electrogravitics and cavities. And I mean, for crying out loud, look at the cover of this right over here. It's the same idea. Just the cover of the book gives that same sort of hint, if you will. But that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
I kind of thought you were going to move towards focusing directing intent with the directional aspect that you had there, but I didn't anticipate your polarization of emotion either. So that was
Thank you.
Neat.
I was going to go there too with the concept of focused intent and the direction and all that, but I think enough of us, or at least on the Patreon, have grasped it by now. So it's like, okay, let's zoom that out and try and, again, this speaks to what we just described. There is a form of quantum entanglement. To those that view time as linear, that right there looks like a muddied soup of God knows what. But if you zoom in, what you then have is what we just laid out right there. So it's just a concept of, again, there's certain people I've spoken to off the record within the US federal government that have said, well, you know, Dave, it's quite possible, with a smirk they're looking at it, it's quite possible that, you know, we've developed more advanced tools to measure these things. And then I'm just there like, listen, all due respect, in my head, I know that there's a certain person that literally wrote the textbook on quantum lasers in the 1960s. So, you know, to say that you just got the tools now, okay, I'll play along. But anyways,
yeah.
Yeah.
So to speak more on frequencies, right? I mentioned earlier 440 hertz being the standard for musical tuning, right? That was supported International Standards Organization in 1953. They helped push that whole thing. So there is a device called a cimascope, and it was invented by co-invented or co-designed by John Stuart Reed. And the cimascope measures cymatics, basically. So when they put certain frequencies into it, it's able to generate images. And when they put 432 hertz into it, it continually produces a triangle. And this triangle, no matter what they did with it, they figured something was wrong initially, and they kept playing with it, and it wouldn't change. It continues to stay a triangle. It'll, I believe that they said it would pulsate and not gyrate, but a synonym of gyrate. Writhe, I believe was the word. It was writhing and pulsating, but it would remain a triangle, and it stayed that way in that state. Now 440 hertz, Mason, you know a little bit about that stuff, right? Being into music.
Yeah, a little bit more from the music side of things. But yeah, what you were just saying, like that's there is a, for every like frequency, like there's a shape, you know, like it corresponds to something. And like oftentimes when we look at the little semantic, you know, the little plates and stuff, we might just see geometric patterns. But from what I've seen, what I've researched, there are, especially when you like tune over into the 432 hertz like frequency spectrum, like you can easily reproduce like different like simple shapes. And like I was blown away the day, I forget the exact video or what I was watching, where like I saw it all pull together, where like I'm like, wait, so sound frequencies can produce shapes. And like, you know, if you think of that in like, you know, not just being a two-dimensional shape on a paper, but an actual 3D or even 4D or 5, you know, however many dimensional, you know, aspects of the object, like I was just like, wait, so this is reality right here, you know. And then when I started to learn about the Schumann resonance and it being a frequency, and I started thinking, I'm like, well, it's not just a flat line going around the planet. It's an actual, you know, it has a full shape, you know, that encapsulates the entire planet. And I think in a sense, like, you know, there's something, I'm starting to lose my thought, but just something to do with like the Schumann harmonics and creating density. I don't know. I lost my thought.
And I wanted to
there's
jump.
So much.
No problem. I want to jump into
you might know where I was going. Maybe.
Okay. It's interesting you say this, because there's something too. It just came to me now. Topological photonic knots. And what's interesting about that is that it seems to use cavities to encapsulate those photonic knots using harmonics in a vector scalar sense to
yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
That's what I was like searching for, and my brain was scrambling. What you were saying earlier about the cavities, and I was just like, wait, that could be the in a sense, like what's in the Schumann harmonics, because there's not just one frequency; it's like a number of different frequencies that like change as it moves outwards. And I'm like, just from what I know about music, and like even when I started recording some music recently on my guitar, I switched from using 432 or 440 bass tuning to 432, and I noticed the harmonics were different. And so I definitely think that these cavities like could pertain to like Schumann harmonics in a way.
We have also Heinrich Casimir from the Netherlands, I believe, with produced the Casimir effect long ago, and that won the Nobel Prize, I believe, but then kind of went quiet. And then of course we have the Casimir effect, as well as the forgive me, the I lost it, but I'll get it. But Scott, please.
You're forgiven. So Nikola Tesla, he said that the brain and the earth itself work on the same frequencies. Following that, he said, if we can control that resonant system electronically, we can direct and control the entire mental system of humankind. So that personally to me, knowing that cell phone towers emit frequencies, like everything is frequency, to be frank, right? So part of that may be an aspect of control, whether on the surface or an unintended byproduct of technology. That's up for debate. But it's a thing. Quite frankly, as we've already demonstrated, it correlates to the Schumann resonance correlates to brain frequency. As you had asked a few times in the past, like, has anybody had like weird experiences this weekend? Our good friend Mason here has a channel on Telegram called Schumann Beings, and there are folks in there who share images from the Russian Schumann frequency monitoring station. I don't know the term of that, Mason. You break it down?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, you described it perfectly. It's kind of like a Schumann resonance monitoring station. There's one over in Russia. There's one in Italy, and there's I think a few others, but they're not as frequently updated or as accurate. And a lot of people in my community and some of the other people I know, like kind of more into spiritual practices and things like that, they have their own way of interpreting the Schumann resonance charts and looking at the amplitudes. And a lot of people get confused with like the amplitude versus, I even get confused with the terminology, but I know that like when the Schumann resonance, when they speak of it in terms of the number going up, it's not in frequency in hertz, it's the amplitude, it's the intensity. And so a lot of us in the communities have noticed correlations where some people, when there's solar flares, solar activity creating geomagnetic storms, people have noticed an increase in just feeling off, feeling emotional, crying, feeling very fatigued, very super energetic, having what a lot of people call ascension symptoms. And this is a word that's very diluted in kind of mainstream new age, if you will, but there's definitely something to it, especially when you think in terms of frequential, and how like these different, what we were talking about, the different mind states, the alpha, beta, gamma states. 2017 I think was the first time that the Schumann resonance chart reported, I mean, and of course it could have happened other times, but in just when we've been following the Schumann resonance, they noticed a peak in the amplitude to, I think it was over 36 hertz, or sorry, not 36, but honestly, we don't know what the actual measurement that they use is. Like it just is a number, and there's no reference to what it measures. We just know it's an amplitude, so I shouldn't have said hertz, but basically it rose over 36, and that's unheard of, like in terms of like what we have measured. It usually doesn't go over 15, and a lot of people believe that correlates with recent events that are happening in our world. Could be people.
Are you, Mason, are you referring
in frequency?
Are you referring to the Russian woodpecker?
Maybe, I don't know. I'm familiar with the technology, but elaborate on
those interesting grid-like towers from long ago with cones, like coils, that were used during the Soviet era. over long distances. I believe it was called the Russian woodpecker, and there were some other European countries that sort of followed suit. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of that work went to the Americans through the work of people like Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden and Lieutenant Colonel John B. Alexander, and you name it. But yeah, I think that's along the same lines, having to do with the harmonics of the earth. Instead of tuning the harmonics of the earth to the people, tuning the people to the harmonics of the planet, and then readjusting the state of environmental entropic, I guess you could say, like scalability, really, to that. So then you can basically have a collective set of individuals be in tune with the planet, but in a way they don't even realize. And then they can, on the surface, they can attribute that to, well, oh, I'm getting aches from the rain, and it's going to rain, so I'm getting achy and things like this, which is fine, but not realizing on the larger collective that it's being used in a particular direction that the individual did not consent to. Right. And then that speaks to putting things in our faces by bending things and not, again, that whole idea there.
Right. And that speaks to everything from, just the frequency of language itself, like getting into like the Dan Winters type of perspective of language. And it also speaks to, I keep losing my thought, but it's something based off what you were just saying. But, just the connection between people and the Schumann resonance. And what I was going to talk about was Havana syndrome, and like how, I don't know if you remember, I sent a video kind of through the Telegram groups and through the Schumann Beings group last year about the weird spirals that were pulsing outward from Havana on the lightning maps on the Windy app, that you can track, different weather, you can see the lightning and different, things that are moving, in storms and whatever. Right. And there were these spirals, and that was right around the time that, there was an increase in the news about, Havana syndrome cases. And going back to like the people looking at the Schumann resonance charts, we've seen all sorts of weird stuff. 19 hertz, a line across the Schumann resonance charts, and almost like these like interjected points, and like you can see it looks like interference, and a lot of people speculate that influences us in our brain state, our way of functioning. And like you said, we might just dismiss it as, oh, it's just a rainy day, oh, I'm just having a bad day, and that's what creates, the dissolution and like the conflict among people.
Shout out to Philip for that, discovering the spirals.
Yes,
so
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah,
it was Philip that discovered that.
Real quick, Dave, I know I want to step on your toes real quick.
No,
so
please,
just
please.
To speaking on cavities within cavities, science and tech from Newsweek. Earth's atmosphere extends far beyond the moon, scientists discover. Right. And this is 2019, February of 19. And there were also articles talking about how the Earth has enough oxygen, the moon has enough oxygen in its surface to sustain so many people for so many years and all that. Pretty neat. So the atmosphere extending beyond what, the moon, I don't know if because that's closer to the Van Allen belt, which I presume is the Earth's perimeter of the magnetic field from the poles, if we were to go back
That's
to
exactly what I was thinking,
Van
Allen belt.
Right. So if you're sitting in if you were to think of it like radiation, being in an area of super high magnetism probably wouldn't be very good for you. I mean, after all, we have iron in our blood and gold in our brains and all kinds of different stuff to that effect. I mean, we're also bioelectric creatures or electrochemical creatures.
And if we apply the concept of, or the foundation of quantum electrodynamics to this, that's very simple as, okay, well, if one had the tools to then measure this, how long has this been hidden from us? And this speaks to an external observation of, Earth's atmosphere. What about the junk DNA within us? Are there more of those layered cavities that are, of course, not junk, that then speak to, well, oh, there's another strand that is at such a nano level, we didn't even realize it till now. Same way they're saying it externally with the planets. Oh, there's such a large photonic cavity or something of this kind that seems to extend farther than we initially thought. What's the difference? Zooming out, zooming in. To me, it's the same idea. So I think a lot of people should, not saying this should be the way to look at it, but one way to look at it would be, okay, if this is the case with the Earth, what about with our DNA? If there's a dissemination of some type of cone or toroid field that is non-local, which speaks to the entire set of quantum physics, which is a proposal of conjectures that are not fluid when you put them side by side, right? What does that say about all of this then? But I think those type of questions then lead to, understanding that we have a lot of things organically that we're now being told on the surface must be done physically, because, it's not that we're being told we don't have it. It's just being dismissed or obfuscated from the narrative, right? Because not to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah.
Having it organically versus being told you have to do it technologically.
Right.
Let's say.
Yep. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So real quick, the Earth's atmosphere is made up of layers of gas surrounding the planet held in place by gravity. Different layers are known as the troposphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, where some of those massive lightning strikes occur, the thermosphere, and the exosphere. And the geocorona, where the atmosphere merges with outer space, is a cloud of hydrogen atoms. That's interesting to me. Now, I've never read this article in full before, but I do know that the only thing that escapes black holes is jets of hydrogen gas. So that's
holy crap. The only thing yeah.
Dude. Then we have hydrogen and 2 oxygen. We could go all day with this stuff, bro.
Hydrogen, where the atmosphere merges with our space, is a cloud of hydrogen atoms. So let's repeat that one last time just to make sure everyone heard that. The only thing that escapes from a black hole is hydrogen. Is that correct?
Yeah, hydrogen jets. Yeah,
let's
go real time real quick. Hydrogen jets,
black
hole. As the jet travels away from the black hole, it collides with the hydrogen cloud and interacts with the gas. It creates multiple streams of expanding bubbles, extend out roughly 500 light years into the galactic halo. Why do black hole jets carry so much energy? It's weird, right? Like, I thought nothing escaped black holes.
Well, let's go one step further, particularly hydrogen. Why did I seem to be so blown away? Because Dan Winter's Planck times golden ratio to the integer of 1, 17, 18, and 19 seems to be the 3, again, going back to the 3 of yes, no, and then indeterminate, that whole concept there. But the whole, duality, yes, no, then something down the middle. But those 3 equations make up, coincidentally, I say that with air quotes, the exact radius or radii of hydrogen, which is one of the building blocks of our reality. To me, that's like, whoa. And you just said hydrogen. I didn't know this is the only thing that seems to come out of a black hole when it burps those mini jets. It's right in front of us, in my opinion, at least to a large extent. Wow. I want to thank you a ton, Scott, because if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, we think of them as giant cosmic vacuum cleaners. It's not all one-way travel. As gas falls towards the black hole, it spirals gradually inwards like water going into a plug hole, but it's not all lost. Some of it instead can be diverted outwards into narrow energetic beams known to astronomers as jets. Narrow energetic beams, almost like a laser made out of matter, because I mean that's all that a laser is a very narrow band of light.
I wonder if that's what's coming from Havana too when those spirals are seen.
Could be. Those spirals are all over the place, though. We've found them in other locations as well. Hydrogen gas moving close to the speed of light, depositing large amounts of energy into their surroundings. And in research published by Nature Today, my colleagues and I detected the telltale signatures of ordinary atoms in the jets from a small black hole just a few times the mass of the sun. Astronomers must have known about the jets for almost a century, yet the first jet was discovered in 1918 by Herbert Curtis, coming from the nucleus of the powerful galaxy M87, when he saw the curious straight ray of light that was later found to be an intense source of radio waves. That's interesting. So radio waves is a byproduct of matter, because I mean, I guess it's not really matter, gas traveling at near the speed of light. So maybe matter moving at high rates of speed creates turbulence, which can be other frequencies. I don't know.
So hold on. Astronomers have known about jets for almost a century. The first jet was discovered in 1918, coming from the nucleus of the powerful galaxy. What he saw was a curious straight ray of light, was later found to be an intense source of radio waves, kind of like X-ray and gamma ray waves, similar to what those spheres may be emitting. It's almost as if there needs to be a cyclical reoccurrence, kind of like, again, a metaphorical or literal toroid field of certain elements and light waves that are confined to this particular reality, because it needs to be the same building blocks that encompass the potential limitation of what we're living in or living within. It's almost as if there needs to be that compositional reoccurrence, because that speaks to the Ouroboros, right, in ancient times, of eating itself, that whole cycle there, that it seems like there's no other way that this needs to be structured within the foundation of the archetypes, which speaks to your sympathetic vibrations, that would speak to the concept of harmonics within a photonic spectrum that we cannot perceive deliberately, because of whatever we may be in, seem to align with the touching of the pine cones. And that speaks to, again, the horizontal angle, the vertical angle, which then speaks to, again, quadratics, the cube, the square, which also then speaks to squaring of the circle, in my opinion, because you're keeping those same elements confined within the I guess you could say, the parameters of certain building blocks, such as hydrogen, to that confined space. And that's why, for example, dare I say, I think, amongst many other possibilities, that, and I could be very wrong, but we see a lot of the spheres and cubes, or cubes and spheres craft, particularly at higher altitudes. It seems as though it's, again, conforming to the set of elements that it's entering into. The same way, you can't put a Call of Duty character into GTA, same idea.
When you say higher altitudes, like I'm sure you can't come up with it off the top of your head, but I'm just curious if it's above the ionosphere. So as we're moving out and away, maybe it has something to do with the intensity. You know what I mean? Like if you get too close to a magnet with a piece of metal, it's getting slapped against the magnet, right? The magnet's going to pull it into the vacuum, and it's going to make contact. Maybe it's a matter of survivability, so these alleged supercrafts that are the size of solar systems or whatever, I don't know, larger than planets, and they can't get close to the planet because of its mass, it would draw it in and it would act like a homing beacon.
I've been told if necessary, it can, but it's not ideal, because it's sort of like its own form of planetary energetic, I guess you could say, seeding. It's its own source of orbital mechanics, and it kind of creates, part of my English, a clusterfuck if you start getting close to another planet. Same thing that if you would have a mothership of that type that you just explained, Scott, interact with another mothership. It's the same idea.
Too many chefs in the kitchen.
They're beautifully said. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
So let's go from outer space back to the Earth here. Okay, we talked about the Earth's atmosphere. We'll leave the Gwen Towers for another time. You've talked about that a few times. It's pretty interesting. Let's get back to something that other people have talked about, but I haven't had a chance to comment on yet. So let's go to starforts.com. And so this is a website that I got turned on to, where apparently it's got just that. All over the world, we have these star forts, and this place here lets you go explore the ones in the US, UK, Italy, France, and Canada, right? So let's choose your heritage. Let's go with Italy, since it's alleged that's where these things started off, right? Oh, look, there's one in Rome. Let's check that out. We're all exploring this together at the same time, folks.
Very neat.
So if we have
oh my God, I've been
there's a pentagon inside there. How about that? Right up against a body of water. It looks like a river to me.
It's a cavity, Scott. It's a cavity inside a cavity.
Yeah, and then followed by cube, right, with a circle inside. Why not? But so when I first started planning this episode out, my initial thought was like these star forts. I've seen some of them where the angles are a bit more pitched, right, where it's very steep in a draw. So I was thinking, well, if there's frequencies that are hugging the ground at extremely low frequency or very low frequency, and they're traversing, I don't know if which direction they would be coming from, if it's a magnetic thing, if it's going from north to south or vice versa. If they were to orient a star fort in that the waves would be coming towards it and go into one of these notches, right? If that would act as a condenser, right? Or a funnel to kind of harvest some of that low frequency.
Can I take it one step further?
Go ahead, bro.
We see here, again, the concept of water being a natural conductor relative to things like piezoelectricity, oscillation, acoustic harmonics, you name it. But if you want to talk about synchronicities, I'd like to give a very quick shout out to Riel, because in real time, I got a Signal message where he's just been sending me some notes for some upcoming, brainstorming episodes and all that. And he said, well, what do you know? If you check Wikipedia, you'll find that the founding date of the institutionalization of Roman law was implemented in the year 1088, 1088. And that speaks to, again, the concept of water being a natural conductor above, within physics, engineering, mathematics, 10 to the power or integer of 8 or above. That speaks to Salvatore Pais when he said to Kurt Mungle, it needs to be above 10 to the power of 8. That speaks to when Veda Austin, the water whisperer, who I'm hoping to have back soon on some new topics, talked about how fish in the water tend to, of many kinds, of all kinds really, tend to naturally gravitate towards pyramid structures, triangular-based structures that then emit frequencies and harmonics of 1.8, 108, 10.8, regardless of where you move the decimal, there's a reoccurrence there. So I wonder if the institution and implementation of Roman law in the year 1088 had something to do at a larger level, that we, as we discussed earlier with the yellow circle, like in one's home, except you macro that out, you zoom that out big time. And what you're then doing, to your point of what you just said, Scott, of could this star fort be harnessing or harvesting some type of bioresonant energy relative to the ether and the vacuum fluctuations that the particle fluctuations dump into the vacuum and then back out with new ones, almost as if our resonance is being fed off of. This would be an ideal area to do that, in my opinion, because you have every single fundamental element, shape, geometry needed for that to occur. And go figure, this particular location you just so happen to choose seems to be the right place for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, consciousness led me. So I remember what I was going to get to earlier when I lost my train of thought with the sympathetic vibrations and stuff, right? So if we have these resonances that are in the cavitation of our atmosphere that are affecting our brains in various ways, you can also have, what do I say? Resonant coupling, right? Where you have two things and you move one closer to the other and it starts to vibrate in sympathy or so it does that. With water, I'd like to say hi to Veda sometime also and maybe ask her some questions too. It'd be a very fun conversation.
Absolutely.
So there's been a number of drop feedings where water is used. So in the raw materials, they talk about channeling where they place a cup of water over the head when they're laying down and they have their head facing towards the north, magnetic north, and they use this water to help aid in the coupling, I guess, of the consciousness. So it's not unreasonable, I think, to perceive that when people are channeling, not everybody's honest about it. I'm sure that there's some fakes out there, but there's some real deal stuff too. When they are channeling, what I understand is they're trying to tune their energetic curvature of their mind to the same energetic curvature of the entity they're trying to contact, right? And being that we're like 70 or 90% water ourselves, it is very likely that water is an antenna or a medium in which we are able to make those connections.
Sort of like the vibrations are simpatico.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I don't vibe with that person. We say things without even really realizing how deep it goes. Go ahead, Mason.
What I'm seeing here is like we were saying earlier, you have a certain frequency that can create the shape of a triangle, so sound and shape are like, they're the same thing. So here we have shapes that could represent a frequency that, whatever they encapsulate. And by placing them near the water, that creates a resonance in the water, which is, like you said, it's like an amplifier. It's like an easy way to broadcast something all over. And then what are we? We're almost entirely made of water and salt. So that symbiotic, that sympathetic, relationship between water and the body. And like, what I don't know is what the intent of these shapes would be. That's what I keep going back and forth. And even on the last Starport episode I was on, I'm still on the fence with like what these shapes exactly represent and what those intents could be.
I wonder, just throwing it out there, if we subconsciously, without realizing it, via in our sleep, brain waves, you name it, as Scott was bringing up earlier, if we give the intent of that and we don't even know it, and us realizing it is what'll break the whole, at least whatever is confining us apart type thing. I just a potential, just to throw it out there as an idea, if we are giving it that intent without even realizing it, because that speaks to locking mass groups of people into entropic cavities around the world. So, and that speaks to, again, quantum physics reality is only as real as the individual observing it. So then you have all of that. And then there's this disarray, confusion. You throw in emotion into the energy sources that are constantly distracted in a very easy manner. And boom, you have what you have going on right now. And then again, trying to sort of remember or revisit the source of the foundation of it. Not saying this is what is, just throwing it out there, but incredible point, Mason. Like
That totally makes sense. Like, and if you think about us, like it goes back to what we were saying about, like, us influencing the human resonance as much as it's influencing us. It's a feedback system, especially. And if we're,
right,
like you were saying earlier, if there's a closed system to it, it's just bouncing back and forth. And you're right, maybe our intent, affects these, these shapes, like maybe it's not something that produces a frequency on its own. Maybe it's just meant to kind of amplify, and kind of almost be like like an amplifier, like an antenna. And like, in the closer proximity you are, the more it creates a intense, amplitude of resonance, which projects it out through the water.
Well, right.
I'm just spitballing.
No, of course, if there's an
like
amplifier, to your point, if there's an amplifier, what's the source of the amplification? And that becomes, I think, the very, very basic but very prominent question. So I think that's something that we got to realize too. Maybe us, not saying it is, but Scott, please.
Being that cymatics are shapes that are generated through frequency, what if these things are built to specifically be able to tune in or broadcast a particular wave?
And then using what you brought up earlier of sympathetic vibrations, that speaks to messing with the weather in a certain part of the planet, that speaks to driving mass consciousness entropically to a certain emotional state of anger. Sort of like when people, again, you go to a protest, you feel very riled up. Well, sure, look at the sources that are emitting those sympathetic vibrations. That, again, sympathetic maybe not be the best word for that, but the vibrations are clicking on that same wavelength. And what you're then doing is using the vector scalar state via intention to point towards that focus.
So it also speaks so maybe, all right, so there's some pretty interesting things about water. Like, it doesn't compress very well. So there have been applications of using water in conjunction with shaped charges of plastic explosives to do really interesting things. They have basically, it's a preformed plastic container. They fill it with water. They put a plastic explosive under underneath of it. And you know how they use high pressure water to cut denim and cut bowling balls and stuff? It's the same thing. They use it to detonate or destroy IEDs or vehicle-borne IEDs without it actually going off. The water pressure is so strong it cuts the bombs in half. They have them to cut holes in the sides of buildings and stuff through concrete and brick, where it's just a shape charge, but the water doesn't compress and it just cuts a door out of a wall with an explosion. Sound. If you make sound underwater, it travels much better than it does through our cavitation up here, right? But interestingly, if water is that fantastic of a conductor where it can conduct consciousness, it may be better for tuning into specific things. But we have the Schumann resonance field that's going across the globe, and it could be that is one of the purveyors of the 100th monkey effect, where you have so much consciousness having a certain opinion that it starts to spread elsewhere, being picked up by these magnetic fields or magnetic waves or whatnot, and being transferred elsewhere.
I wonder if that hundredth monkey effect, thank you for bringing that up, how much that resonates, no pun intended, with the Schumann resonance and the different cavities that seem to lock into each other, and in some cases deliberately unlock from each other or do not interlace in a way that, like when you take a Russian Matryoshka doll and you put one over top of the other, the way they kind of click in, if some are deliberately not clicking and being inverted to a state of a mirror reality that then appears to give a clicking in this mirror state, when realistically there's something up top that should be the source of the click that we are observing entropically on certain parts of the planet. Not to say this is for all parts of the planet, but again, that speaks to the synthetic, or at least the inverted Merkaba, which speaks to the star forts because it encompasses the same set of shapes. You have the cube, the triangle, and the sphere. The cube, the pyramid, the sphere, and that seems to make up the composition of the Platonic solids that then work into dodecahedrons, all of these different shapes and variables. Oh my gosh, that would explain as well too how you have the going off of the proposal, not fact, but proposal that these aluminum spheres, based on last week's episode, may in fact be sort of like guards with the shotgun. They would utilize the three fundamental Platonic solids that again, there's the number 3 that comprise the foundational blueprint of what we're in. So those 3 points and vortices are not only a strategical protector of anything in the physical that may attack it, but at the same time, it is also creating that of orthogonal tensor-metric states using topology and what's called knots in physics, KNOTS, to be able to use things like the star forts, things like the ley lines to amplify that resonance using, again, the sympathetic vibrations, which could explain why certain parts of the planet, some of these spheres prefer to head to compared to others, depending on where they are at any given point in time. Sort of like, again, going to vibe with people that you vibe with better than others.
So in what you're talking about, I may be off by a degree, but it could also speak to 432 hertz versus augmenting that to 440. So there's anybody could go to YouTube and type in 432 hertz versus 440 hertz emotion. Type in emotions, and you'll find that there are videos talking about people immediately relaxing when they hear 432, 440 increasing anxiety and stress. A whole bunch of that stuff. Even Kanye West was talking about it wasn't 440, but he was talking about 808 hertz. Yeah.
Yep.
The 808 drums and the bass and the sub frequencies.
Yep. Exactly. Sorry guys, not to be so abrupt in this regard, but would we be able to cut it in the next little bit? Just I think
we can call it, man. We've covered an awful lot of ground.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But I did want to say, Scott, if there's anything you wanted to bring up to the audience in terms of your Twitter or anything like that, I want to say that Scott has a very truly thought-provoking feed on Twitter that I really encourage you folks that have it to to follow him on. And even if you don't have it, maybe you should get it just for the sake of following him, because really some of his tweets, they really go deep into philosophical thought and otherwise. But I don't mean to speak for you, brother, but
thanks, brother. No, I appreciate it. If I do, I love you too. Thank you. You can find me online at Twitter with CURIOSUS ANIMUS. You can also find me on Instagram, though I've been slightly less active. It's WTFIRGO5. What the fuck is really going on 5? So
nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And here, of course, this is the place to be on Generation Z Patreon.
I can't thank you enough for that, brother. And Mason, is there anything you wanted to bring up before we call it?
Well, in terms of one last thought that I wanted to throw out there, like when I look at the starports and we always see the pictures from above, I see them as pillars, like energetic pillars that shoot outward, and that makes me think of like acupuncture, like almost penetrating the ionosphere to create certain disturbances.
That speaks to something that we could jump into, if with Scott's permission, next round, something called
not to get us all rolling again. I know
no worries. The
divine
divine command theory. That's something that's interesting, that speaks to me at least, scalar, micro, macro, the divine command theory and its potential correlations to 0 point energy and something called deontology. So I won't explain what those mean, just to, I guess, give both the Scott and the audience a bit of a homework for fun. But thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and all that. And we will catch you all next time around. And of course, thank you, Scott, as always, for these fantastic ideas that just springboard into so many different areas. Truly can't thank you enough, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Dave. And thanks for coming on, Mason. I appreciate it.
No problem. It was awesome.